Today we're going to discuss the cost factor involving Kamala Harris. This might seem a little bit unusual, but I've looked at this issue from a different standpoint. Many people want to look at her position on law and order as a method of determining what type of personality she is. But my position is, and my endeavor is going to be to look at her from the standpoint of how expensive it is to have a person of her character involved in a position of high importance. She was a district attorney and then an attorney general, and now she's a heartbeat away from being the chief executive officer and law enforcement official of the United States as president. Because realize that Joe Biden will not last, realize that he's a Trojan horse, and realize that a vote for Joe Biden will become ultimately a vote for Kamala Harris as president. So let's look at her history and view it in the perspective of how expensive it was for her to be involved as a chief law enforcement official to the taxpayers. When she was district attorney of San Francisco, she was involved in many shady types of prosecutions. And I'll just go through a couple of them briefly just to examine and show you what was involved. The convictions that she was involved with that had a lot of impact financially for San Francisco was that she was involved with 600 drug cases in San Francisco. Now, the history of this, I won't get into specifics, but the history of it is that there was a lab technician who was using more drugs than he was testing. Because of that fact, several cases had to be thrown out. And what happened with Kamala Harris was that she doubled down in that issue and she fought the removal of those cases from the prosecution rolls. So what she did was she hid evidence. Because of that fact, those cases went forward and had to be dismissed. Now, why is that important? The reason it's important is because she ultimately took cases that should have never gone to prosecution, brought them to prosecution, and they had to be thrown out. This is very costly to prosecute a case from a district attorney's standpoint, to have police involved in it, to have it be reinvestigated, to have the drugs retested, reweighed. This is very expensive from a man-hour standpoint. There was 600 of these cases. Now, knowing what I know about the criminal law, the fact of the matter is that these cases cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 each. So if you look at it that way, you're talking about millions of dollars in faulty prosecutions. Then she had enough nerve to try to cover herself by trying to have the judge who chastised her disqualified. And the basis of that was her husband was a defense attorney, and it didn't last. It went up, was appealed, was dismissed, and thrown out. Again, more cost. Now, not to say how much those 6,000 cases were in the investigation by the police officers, in any penalties or incarceration that involved the individuals who had to be supported while they were incarcerated, whose cases were ultimately thrown out. How many cases and how much it cost the community because drug dealers that should have rightfully been convicted were not able to be convicted. Instead of withdrawing the cases and re-prosecuting, what she did was she let the prosecutions go forward. And that's really shameful. A second type of evidence that we have is her desire to prosecute people who were wrongfully convicted and then to hold on and double down on that. There was an individual by the name of Jamal Truelove who was wrongfully convicted of murder. One of her buddies, best friends, whatever you want to call it, was an individual by the name of Linda Allen. She was an assistant district attorney when Kamala Harris was the district attorney. She took great interest in the Jamal Truelove case. In fact, she was there for the conviction and the sentencing, which is kind of unusual. The case was, he was ultimately sentenced to 50 to 100 years in jail on very sketchy evidence. Ultimately, the case was dismissed by the appellate court for prosecutorial misconduct, and it resulted in a $13.1 million settlement. That was how much cash the taxpayers had to pay for that one case. Not saying how much it cost in prosecution, investigation. And this gentleman was incarcerated for 6.5 years. There was a cost to that, to have him incarcerated because he was wrongfully there. All of that cost probably added up to another couple $1,000,000. So you're looking at $15 million on one case alone. And there are other cases that she was involved in that created more cost for the taxpayers. I estimate that her cost to the taxpayers of San Francisco and ultimately California, because she became Attorney General, was well over $100 million. That's a hole in their pocket. Now, all the time you hear how California is hurting for money, how it makes so much, but it can never catch up. Well, wonder why. Here it is right here, living proof. The types of things that Kamala Harris would do, she would prosecute for truancy. Now, she touts herself as a person who favors Black Americans. Well, who do you think truancy affects negatively most? That's African American and people of color. But she prosecuted them with misdemeanor charges while she was district attorney. And she doubled down on it when she gave her speech in California when she accepted the nomination for Attorney General. This is the type of thing that Kamala Harris is famous for. Whatever is expedient, whatever will get her elected. In the meantime, her incompetence creates so much cost. Now we want to put this incompetent person a heartbeat from the presidency with a man who's probably not going to last. There's very little faith that I have that Joe Biden will last. So this is the incompetent that you're going to put into the Oval Office. Somebody who's just has no concept of what's right or wrong, but only what's necessary for the moment. This is why I believe that it's important to view this situation from the cost-benefit standpoint. She cost the taxpayers a lot more than she benefited. And that's my view of Kamala Harris's position. A vote for Joe Biden is a vote for her, and that can never stand. Don't be fooled. Make the right choice. A vote for Joe Biden is actually a vote for Kamala Harris. Vote to re-elect President Donald Trump. For more information and videos like this, visit www.reelectdonaldtrump.net.